So this is a very interesting and exclusive case I use for my coaching sessions. So you're not going to find it on PrepLounge. This candidate here is the second candidate I interview on this case in the WatchMyCase program, and you're going to see that he does a better job than the first candidate. However, he still makes some major mistakes, and you're going to see throughout the case what those are. On the other side, he's also very good. He thinks of the value of money over time. He mentions that he has to understand the revenue and the costs of producing these new tires. A lot of people just try to think of the value of the patent by thinking of the revenue only, as if there were no production costs. This is a very common problem that I see in this case. So he has some problems with calculating big numbers, which surprised me a bit, because I gave another case to this candidate and he was very good with maths and with on the quantitative side. And here he showed a very strong weakness, or a very clear weakness with calculations with big numbers. And I give some tips how to do that throughout the case, and also at the final part when I give him feedback. So let's see how he does it. Okay, so in today's case, you are gonna, well, today's case is a special case. It's not on PrepLounge. It's not a part of our database. It's a personal case I use during my expert interviews. So your client is Goodyear. You know Goodyear? It's a very famous tire manufacturer. And they came up with a technology that allows them to produce tires that never wear off. They never wear off, so they can be used for 100, 200, 1 million kilometers, and it will still be like brand new. Right? And they are wondering if, I don't know, Pirelli or another competitor comes to them and wants to buy this patent. Well, the technology they patented it, right? And they're wondering if a competitor comes to them and buys and wants to buy the technology. What should be a price, a reasonable price that they should sell it for? So in other words, how would you price this patent?
Understood. Okay. Okay, let me just rephrase the problem. Sounds very interesting, and then possibly ask 1-2 clarifying questions.
Sure.
So the client is Goodyear, sorry, and they produce a technology so that they can produce which allows them to produce tires which never wear off. So it doesn't matter how many kilometers they run.
Right.
And now the client is wondering what would be the right price for it if a competitor approaches them and wants to buy the technology.
That's right.
Just to understand, do they just have a pattern or a patent, or do they already something like tested it and introduced it, or it's?
They haven't introduced it. They have tested it in laboratories, but they haven't introduced it, or they haven't started producing it. But he could start doing that in a very near future.
Okay, and for the client, is the only objective to maximize the price, or is the objective to stay further in the business? And I mean, why are they considering potentially selling it?
Well, let's say that if they can make more money selling it than by keeping it, then they would sell it, right? So their main criterion here is the profit that they can generate with it. So they should sell it if it's more, if someone wants to pay more than they think they would then generate with it. So the financials are here the predominant factor for their decision.
Understood. Understood. Okay. And we will sell it to anyone, irrespective of the. So it doesn't matter who the.
Doesn't matter.
The competitor. It doesn't matter who it is.
They are open. Yeah.
So
Money has no face and no name. Let's put it this way.
Good. Understood. Then, do you mind if I take a minute just to structure the problem?
Not at all. Take your time.
Well, I like the clarification questions of this candidate. It's interesting to understand, for instance, why they want to sell it and to whom they want to sell, even though it would have been better if he had told me why he thinks this information is important or interesting or will change the value of the patent. I mentioned that also later. So every time you ask a question, you have to make sure you let the interviewer know why you think this is important, how this will impact your analysis or your final conclusion, right? Don't ask questions just for the sake of asking them. Now, one clarification question that I missed here is, what is the patent duration? Now, whenever you think or hear about patents, you have to straight away relate that to a duration. Every patent has a duration. So this is going to be one of the main points that I miss here in this case with this candidate.
Understood. Okay. So, in order to understand the technology, I would like to look at the revenues and the cost of the technology in order to get the cash flows. So, how much would be generated? What the demand will be? What are the costs? Just to get an approximation for the cost for the value of the business. Okay. Then, in the second step, I would also like to understand, if we introduce this new technology, what would be the loss of revenues for our existing business? Because probably if we continue to sell our other products, we will probably lose some of the market or some of the products.
So cannibalization.
Cannibalization, exactly.
All right.
Interesting point that you should always think of when you introduce a new product or entering a new market is, are you going to jeopardize or cannibalize your existing product? So always think cannibalization. It might be an important point. In this case, it is important, but to simplify the problem, the case, I asked the candidate to not consider it later on in the case.
Okay. And in the third step, I would like to look at potential acquirers. So who would be the acquirer, and also especially on the synergies for the acquirer, because this would determine the price for the acquirer.
Okay.
These are the three main steps. So So just to understand the revenues, and the revenues is obviously split in price and the volume. Do we have any demand forecasts for this specific product? So how much volume would it drive?
Well, that's something you are supposed to estimate as well. So how many tires would you expect to be sold with
Okay.
this new technology?
With this new okay. So then probably let us start overall with how many tires are sold in the market. Just to understand, Goodyear, for the tires, are we estimating the demand for the whole world or for a specific country, or
what do you think?
In which? I mean, overall, the more or less Goodyear is selling everywhere. I mean, it's a global company. So, but we have, of course, a specific market share afterwards. So after we have the global demand for the tires, we can apply the market share of Goodyear and then break it down for the demand for our own tires.
Okay, sure. So the answer is yes, it's global, because if you think of this breaking through technology, they will very likely use it or sell it all over the world, right? Because it's a very interesting technology. Tires are used everywhere in the world. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I mean, it would be also two kinds of tires. On the one hand, we will sell, of course, to the existing cars, which needs to replace the tires. And on the other hand, there are also cars produced, right?
Okay, that's a good point. So you're already anticipating who are the customers, so two segments of customers.
Yeah.
So car producers?
Exactly, so car producers. And of course, we have the end client who...
end consumer, let's put it this way.
End consumer, yeah.
Okay.
This is also a very subtle detail a lot of candidates never get to see, or they see that very late in a case, and it makes a very big difference. Those two types of customers, the car automakers and the private buyers or the end consumers, people like us who have to replace their tires, it's very important to understand that there are those two types of customers. It's not two types of tires like he says, it's two types of customers actually. So the segmentation of the customers in this case is very important, is paramount for the understanding of the case. You're going to see that in a second.
Okay,
good.
So let me first estimate the number, so the number of tires needed for car producers.
Great. Let's do that.
Okay, so we have in the world, let us say, so around 7 billion people.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds...
And the question is, so how many people have a car? So I would assume that probably per household there are 1.5 cars.
1.5 cars per household.
Per household on average.
In the whole world.
In the whole world. Maybe in the underdeveloped countries probably less. So maybe let us say probably less than one. Then let us say, I don't know, 1 on average, because in the developed world we would have around 2, and in the underdeveloped world we would probably have less than 1.
Now notice here that this candidate makes an assumption that is a bit too high or too far off. He says that on average in the world there are 1.5 cars per household. So there's a lot of countries which are poor, and there are not a lot of cars, and even in rich countries there are a lot of people living in cities who don't use a lot of cars. So it's not really a very good assumption, but it's not that much of a problem because I discussed it with him and we together get to a better assumption. So it's not really a big problem if you make wrong assumptions, but try to be as close to the reality as possible. So always think that the average takes into account poorer countries and not only where you live, so the reality you're used to. Think that you are inserted in a bigger world.
Well, if you think that in the developed world there are more or less two people per household on average, some countries it's a bit more, but well, saying that two cars per household in the developed countries is, I think, a bit too much.
Okay.
On the one hand, because there are more and more people living in cities with very good public transportation, right? So cities are going to increase their population even more, and less cars are going to be present in cities. And if you think of poor populations, it's less than half, I would say. So let's say overall in the world there's 0.5 cars per household.
0.5 cars per household. Okay.
Right.
So right now I have to estimate the number of households. So if we have 7 billion people, I would assume it is an assumption that a household consists probably on average out of 3 people.
Let's say 3.5 to make your life easier.
Notice here that the way I choose this number 3.5 is actually in a very deliberate way, because I want to make my life easier afterwards in the calculation, because I know that I will have to divide 7 billion by this number. So what I'm doing here is I'm thinking one step ahead, and that's what most consultants do. So they try to simplify their lives as much as they can. This candidate here was thinking, okay, 3, maybe 4. So why not to choose a number that will make your life easier and make sense, is realistic. So try to show that you think one step ahead by choosing the right numbers to make your calculations easier and your life easier.
3.5, okay. So it's 7 billion, let me just estimate the number of cars, divided by 3.5, so it is 2 billion. So we have 2 billion households, and times 0.5, we have 1 billion cars.
Right.
Okay, and right now I would like, the cars obviously have a life cycle. So this we have right now, the cars in circulation, it's 1 billion.
Okay.
And they obviously have a life cycle, and I would say, I don't know, an average life cycle of a car, 10 years, 15 years?
10 years sounds, yeah. Maybe 15 years in poorer countries because they need to use their cars longer. So, yeah, but let's assume 10 years.
10 years.
Just to make your calculations easier then.
So it's 1 billion, it's 1 0 less. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this 3. So we have around 100 million cars.
This is what I mentioned at the beginning. That was one of the weaknesses that were crystal clear to me in this case. So this candidate is very good with maths, with quantitative analysis, but dealing with big numbers with a lot of zeros is not one of his strengths. And I told him just to divide by 10, so 1 billion divided by 10 is 100 million. Don't count the zeros. It's going to take you nowhere. So only count the zeros if you have 2 very big numbers. But if one is just 10 or 100 or a very simple number, don't count the total number of tens, right? This...
Right. They need to be replaced every year.
This candidate here uses the replacement concept. Well, if you saw my other videos, if you watched our YouTube channel, PrepLounge's YouTube channel, you're going to see that there's a lot of interesting frameworks and concepts that we recorded for you. And one of the most watched ones is the replacement concept. And why? Because it's very, very useful for you to estimate size of markets. And in this case, this candidate used the replacement concept to calculate how many cars are sold per year in the world. And he did that very quickly. And if you don't know the replacement concept, it can get really tricky.
Okay.
Yeah, and every car has. Now we have to consider how it is done in which world. So on the one hand, you have probably, new cars, and new cars are always coming with a new set of tires. Mm-hmm. And if we say that the manufacturer always provides, so without any consideration whether it is winter or summer, always the same set of tires, so only 4.
Let's assume there's no winter and summer tires. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's 400 million tires per year for new cars.
Okay, great.
Just because I forgot to ask, do we produce motorcycles as well? I mean, do we produce tires for motorcycles as well?
Very good question. Yes, we do. Not only for motorcycles, but also for other types of vehicles.
Yeah.
Maybe you can elaborate on this at the end, if you think of other factors that might influence the price, the final price that you come up with in the end of the case. But for now, let's assume we're talking just about cars.
The candidate here makes a very good remark. He asks if the client sells also tires for other applications rather than automobiles, rather than cars. And I mentioned that it's a very good point because there's a lot of other application fields for tires. But for now, he should focus on cars only. But at the end, he could elaborate more on this. Only that the candidate never mentioned that again, never gets back to this point. So every time when the interviewer gives you a clue or a hint that you should come back to something later, write that down and circle that 2 or 3 times to make sure you won't forget it, which is what this candidate does. Okay, so don't commit the same mistake.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so right now we have to figure out how many tires we need to replace. So overall we have, as I calculated before, we have around 100 million cars in circulation. Or sorry, no, we have around, we have around, we had around 1 billion car of circulations.
Right.
1 billion cars in circulation. Cars in circulation, and of those, every year 100 million cars are replaced. So every year there are new cars. So for 900 million cars, instead of 1 billion, I need to replace potentially the tires.
Okay.
It depends. And let us say, what's the average? So on the one hand, you have, let us assume that first of all, you have only one set of tires. So no distinguish between summer and winter.
Yeah, let's do that.
It's probably easier. So what is the average life cycle of a tire?
What do you think?
I would say it's around 2 years.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's a fair number.
Yeah, 2 years. So it's 9 divided by 2. So we have 450 million. So 900 million divided by 2 is 450 million. So, and these are the number of cars which need a replacement of tires for 1 year.
Okay.
You realize here again that this candidate is using the replacement concept for tires now, not for cars. And the life cycle, the lifetime of a tire is estimated by him at about 2 years, which is fair. However, he makes a mistake here. He takes 100 million cars that are not going to have to substitute or to replace their tires, and he does then 900 divided by 2 years. And that's wrong. It assumes that after the first year, the cars will have to replace their tire. So the better way or right way to do this would be to take 1 billion cars and divide it by 2 years, and you're going to see that there would be 500 million cars per year exchanging tires, but 4/5 of those are replacing existing tires, and 1/5, just the first ones, are being produced, are using new tires. So in the end, he should have gotten 400 million cars and not 450. And that happened only because he assumed that the tires would be first exchanged after 1 year that the car was produced.
Yeah, and again, this number multiplied. So if we replace it, if we take it times 4, so we have four tires per car. It is 4.5 million times 4. What is this? This is 16. This is 18. This is 1.8 billion tires. So 1.8 billion in the replacement market, and we would have 400 million in the new market. So overall, it's 2.2 billion tires a year.
Great, got it.
Is it more or less what's the market is? Just
yeah, that's a very good approximation, let's say, of the real number.
Okay. So right now I would like to know for this 2.2 billion. These are our tire market. So what is the competitor structure? What is our market share, and to how many people would we possibly sell it?
So currently Goodyear has 10% of the global market.
10%.
Yeah. Okay.
So in this case, 2.2 billion, and 10% of it is just a second, please, because I need to write down the zeros. So it's 2.2, so it's 100 less, so it's 2, 1, 2, 3. It's 2, so it's 2.2, 1, yeah. Okay, so it thinks, so it is 3 and 3, so 2.2 billion, it's 220 million what I'm counting. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's quite a lot of time to divide something by 10, right? So this candidate here is just counting a lot of zeros and then discounting one of them, and then he gets confused because there's a lot of zeros. So don't try to calculate how many zeros there are, again, if you're dividing or multiplying by a simple small number. So 2.2 billion is 2,200 million divided by 10 is 220 million. So try to simplify calculations with a lot of zeros.
So it's 220 million tires we are selling more or less to the customer, to the customer every year. Okay.
To anybody, right?
I mean, this is what I recalculated for cars, and then you have, of course, probably motorcycles, and I don't know, commercial vehicles or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is. So this is selling to anyone. So it's 220 million, and right now is the question: how many of these people would actually use the new technology?
What do you think?
I think it depends on the customer. If the customer makes, the customer would of course assess what is his present value of buying several versions of tire and replacing them every 2 years, or buy one and use it forever. So it depends on the price.
Perfect.
To estimate it.
So how would you price it then? And how would the price influence the amount of, or the market share that this product would then acquire in the market?
I understood. So it depends, right? If we because if we let us price it, let us say that the tire can be used forever. So
let me make a remark here. The tire can be used forever, but for because of safety regulations, this tire will not be allowed to change cars or to be switched to other cars and be used forever. So it can be used forever, but as long as a car lasts.
Okay.
Okay, so there's this small constraint there.
Understood. So as long as the car lasts, so it would be what we just discussed with you, it would be for 10 years. Because we assume the life cycle.
That's your assumption.
That's my assumption exactly. It's 10 years. And we discussed just that we need to change the tires, so normal tires every 2 years. So if we price it 5 times the usual price for a tire, the customer should be indifferent.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So the question right now is what the on the one hand, I mean, from the customer should be indifferent from purely financial point of view, right? Probably there are other preferences which he has to take into account.
Can you quickly then point out or mention some other factors that they would think about when taking the decision?
Of course. So on the one hand, probably the customer doesn't want to drive the same car his whole life, but he wants to change it. This would be the main point I can see. And on the other hand, probably also, for example, I mean, for tires, there's also some fashion risk, right? If I don't know, if you want to have bigger wheels, wider wheels, whatever you want, then you need a different tire.
Okay.
So, and it probably changes from year to year. It's a customer preference. So
how would that impact the price that a client would be willing to pay? Would that increase or decrease the price?
It would decrease the price. It would decrease the price of a 10 years, so of a 10 years tire.
Well, at this point, this candidate shows a lot of creativity, a lot of out-of-the-box thinking as well. None of the candidates I've interviewed so far, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens with this case alone, none of them had thought of the possibility of the client changing or the end consumer changing their minds and being stuck with a tire that has to be used forever, otherwise they will be wasting money on it. So there is a reduction of the price, of the perceived price by the consumer because of that risk of changing their minds and wanting to use larger wheels, for instance. A very good point.
Okay, good. So let's go on then.
Okay, so just to understand it, so what is the current price for a usual? What is the average price for a usual?
$100.
$100.
That's the market, average market price.
Okay. So $500 would be if the customer is indifferent, but as we discussed, probably the customer will deduct their certain whatever. So certainly take a discount just to the issues we discussed.
Right.
So is it probably fair to assume that the tires would be, I mean, if there should be, first of all, what's the customer preference? Does he want to keep the business, the old business, or does he want completely to use only the new technology? Or
so let's assume that's a good point. There will be no cannibalization because they will stop with the old tires and only start producing these new tires. They think that only the new tires, because they think they're gonna sell more tires than they are selling right now because it's a new technology. Will be very will be a breakthrough, and a lot of people will like to buy it. So it will be an innovation.
Okay.
So they're gonna stop completely with the conventional business line.
Yeah,
so
understood.
You can already cross out your second analysis point that you mentioned, the cannibalization then.
So then, of course, we would let us assume that the minimum market is then 220 million tires, right? As we discussed, and we would charge. So instead of 500, probably, I don't know, assume a 20% discount, probably 400, just to the issues we discussed.
Okay.
Would you say it is fair? I'm just assuming a discount.
That's fair.
Yeah. So it's $400 per tire times 220 million. It is. Let me just calculate it. It's 800. It's 8. Wait a second. That's 220 million. And now we have, so 4 times 22 is 88 times the zeros 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it is 8. 220 million times 100, so it is more or less 88 billion in sales.
Right.
Okay, so now we have covered the revenues, what we would, more or less receive with the new tires. So the question right now is, on the one hand the costs. And what I wanted to ask you, whether you want to estimate, because to estimate the firm value, we could also go by the cash flows, but cash flows are not equal costs, because then we need to consider working capital, capex, etc. Is it fair to assume that we just take revenues and costs and then we base the valuation on the net income instead of the cash flows?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. So we assume that profit is equal to cash flow. It's a simplification. I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, if you've done an MBA or you have studied business administration, it's clear to you that revenues and costs are not the same as cash in and cash out. So that's a very good point this candidate raised here. And not a lot of people think of that, but it's a simplification we usually do in case interviews to make them tractable, because otherwise they get just too complex. So, but it's nice that he mentioned it. Profit is not the same as cash flow.
Okay, so concerning the costs, what would be, on the one hand, so my costs per unit to produce these tires, so potentially one-off costs for the investment. And then also what I would like to know is unit costs and I don't know which data you have available, fixed costs, variable costs, so whatever kind of split.
So let's simplify your life again and assume that both variable or fixed costs, it's all going to be put together, and it's going to be $100 per tire to produce. Okay?
$100 per tire.
So the fixed cost is amortized in this cost.
Yeah. Do we have any additional one-off costs for the production?
Let's assume we can, on the one hand, use the current capacity, production capacity, and if we have to expand it, that cost will already be amortized in the $100 per tire. So you can assume that all the costs are included in these $100, okay?
Okay. So then we have, as I said, 88 billion in sales. And if we have no other costs, so it's 100 times what I said before, times 220 million. So 100 per. So what we sell, 220 million times 100 is our costs. What is then 22 billion? And 88 billion minus 22 billion is 66 billion what we make in net income.
Here again, the candidate did not use the best way to calculate the profit. Now, again, you have to take some time to think if you cannot do your calculation in a better, smarter, and faster way. This candidate here calculated the total revenues, 88 billion, and then he calculated the total costs, 22 billion, and then subtracted them to get 66 billion. Well, a better way to do that is to subtract the costs and the price per tire and the cost, so 400 minus 100 is 300, so you're subtracting smaller numbers, and then multiply by the 220 million cars only once. So you do margin times number of units instead of revenues minus costs. It's almost always easier to do that this way than to multiply and get big numbers and then have to subtract them. So try to think a bit before you start doing your calculations.
So I mean, this is very simplified, because also you would have in the P&L probably something like you finance the company to a certain extent, etc. So you would have interest.
Okay.
So it's 66 billion in profits. Okay.
What does that mean then?
So this is the profit we are generating per year with the new technology with the company.
Mm-hmm.
Right now is the question: is it sustainable or not? So will this profits be sustainable for the future, mm-hmm. or will probably our market share be eaten away by other mm-hmm. competitors for whatever reasons? Mm-hmm. But if we assume that it is 66 billion in profits, and we on this basis we can already give a more or less evaluation for the business, especially for this new technology.
Okay, how would you do that then based on this value? So
okay.
What's the step left?
So there are two opportunities to do this. On the one hand, we can just discount the 66 billion into a perpetuity.
Okay.
And then I would need to know the discount rate. I would ask you for the discount rate. And on the other hand, how we can also assume it, because certain companies in the market are traded at certain multiples. Mm-hmm. So in profit multiples, so potentially there is competitors are trading at a certain profit multiple, so we can estimate the profit multiple. So there are the two methods what we would use in order to evaluate more or less the standalone valuation without any synergies, nothing. So for a competitor, it could be even worse more.
Got it. So since this is a new product and it's an innovation, we cannot very well compare this standalone business unit with competitors because there are none who do the same, right? So let's go for the DCF, for the discounted cash flow, and let's assume a 10% interest rate for this company.
Okay. Yeah. Into perpetuity, and the cash flows remain stable.
Let's assume so. Yeah. Okay. So that's the market share you assumed is going to be the average market share for eternity.
Understood. So then it is 66 billion divided by 10%. Mm-hmm. To make it quick, and 66 billion divided by 10% is the same as 66 multiplied by 10. So it would be 660 billion.
Right. How does that sound to you?
It sounds huge.
It sounds huge.
What this candidate does here is something that you should always do. It's one of the golden rules of market sizing cases. I've also shot a video about that too, so it's on our YouTube channel, PrepLounge YouTube. You're gonna find it, and that's the third golden rule of market sizing cases: to always do sanity checks. So it's very important for an interviewer that he has the feeling that the interviewee always will challenge their estimations or their results. So what this candidate does here is, okay, it sounds huge to me, and it gives me the peace of mind that if I hire him and he eventually in 2 or 3 years makes a mistake at the client, he's going to realize it before showing it to the client, and he's not going to embarrass my company. So that's why sanity checks are so important, and you should always do them when you get to a final answer. Don't forget that.
It sounds huge because I mean, for the new technology, it sounds as a huge number.
Why? What are you comparing it with then to make this assessment that it's a huge number?
what I'm comparing is, I'm not aware of the current share price of Goodyear, but the first thing I would compare it, and if it was, I mean, if this new technology existed and the market was aware of it, I would compare it to the share price of the company.
Okay.
Yeah, because it cannot be, I mean, the new technology cannot be worth much more than the company.
Okay. Right. Good. So I guess you came to an interesting conclusion about the price, but the client would also like you to elaborate on what could happen or what drivers could change this number or this estimate that you made in the future. So what could happen? And here you can be very creative and you can mention whatever you want. What could happen that would drive this price up or down that you still haven't taken account of?
Yeah. Do you mind if I take just 30 seconds to
sure.
collect a couple of thoughts that I'm can elaborate on it?
Whenever the interviewer asks you something more complex or something that you feel you need to have a structure to answer, then you have to ask for time to structure your thoughts, to put your thoughts together, and to come up with a structured answer. That's exactly what this candidate does here. So try to always do that if you feel that you cannot answer the question very well without taking some time to brainstorm, or maybe just to put the thoughts together that you already have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let us go one by one. So my first potential point is that there is, for example, a market shift. It means that less people use cars instead of what we forecasted, and therefore the complete market will decrease. And that you also probably, as you mentioned in the beginning, in cities right now, there is great public transportation. So if the infrastructure is further improved, especially in the developing world, people would start to use less cars. Mm-hmm. And what you can also see potentially as another trend is the health trend overall in the world, so that people start to walk more instead of using their cars, and therefore the demand obviously would decrease.
Okay.
The second thing I think about is that potentially the lifetimes of cars is increased because the manufacturer produce better cars. So their lifetime becomes longer. And therefore, of course, because the lifetime becomes longer, and as you told me, for the new cars, the only constraint is that you can only use it more or less for the lifetime of the car, so the tire. And so people use the same car longer, and of course, because of this, we would sell less.
This makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. The next thing is this assumption is, of course, based on certain market share. What we calculated now, the 660 billion, and it is also based on certain price. So on the one hand, so our market share, we forecasted that it is stable. I mean, usually it is not the case. If, for example, I don't know, let us say competitors come up with the same idea or with the same technology, then it would impact, on the one hand, our market share considerably, so lower volume, but also the price will fail. Yeah.
It will fall a lot, right?
Yeah, it would fall a lot. It would probably fall, I mean, to to marginal costs. Yeah. So we would then more or less selling it at costs, and our profits would be minimalized.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, these are the major things I could think about right now. What else? Yeah, that's it. I mean, it could also be a potential. It could also be, I mean, so at the moment we assume, for example, I mean, an advantage, or what would be, on the other hand, the driver for our valuation is, at the moment we assume that there are 0.5 cars per household. And as we all know, this is also, I mean, this is growing, because the more developed the country becomes, and this is also the shift in the world, the more cars are there per household.
Right.
This is one thing.
Okay.
And the last thing I can think about is also about, more or less, let us say, a complementary good, or more or less a complementary good, is the oil price. The oil price, or the fuel we need for the car.
Okay.
I mean, let us assume that the moment, for example, you see in several countries, or you see it overall, that the oil prices are growing because the resource, I mean, is becoming scarce. And because of this, probably people drive less and buy less cars. So we also depend to a certain case on other factors.
So indirectly, it will impact the amount of cars bought.
Yeah.
So it comes down to people using less cars. Your first point. Okay, cool. Great. So sounds interesting. So the CEO of Goodyear would then like to hear that from you. So what you learned in this case, and answer his question then. So he's coming in 30 seconds. And if you can then take these 30 seconds to structure your conclusion, he would be thankful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, dear Mr. CEO, our analysis shows that the maximum price for the new technology would be 660 billion, although this is the maximum price, and it seems that this is not sustainable, just because it involves many assumptions that we included. So our final price would include a heavy discount, possibly of around 50% on the technology, what would be around 330 billion. However, in order to justify the price, we have to analyze the market further. We have to see whether this technology can be copied or not by other competitors, whether it is sustainable. We have also to further analyze the market trends, and and to look how our competition will behave in the future.
All right. Great. So how did you like the case, and how did you feel?
I mean, I put up So I considered revenues and costs in my structure. I didn't I didn't look on cannibalization, we excluded. And synergies of the competitors, it has to be, I mean, if the competitor is buying it, we have to analyze it further. From a quant point of view, I mean, I'm not sure how reasonable my numbers are, to be honest, because I don't know the demand in the market. But I think it was overall not a bad approach. So, I mean, the hardest part for me, to be honest, was the conclusion, to make a conclusion without any data or without any sensible data, how to tell him what he should pay without actually knowing what will happen.
Yeah, so that's the nice thing about this case. So you have actually no data at all. You just you estimated pretty much everything here. I just gave you some data about prices, of course, but you came up with how many tires are sold in the world per year. So you estimated, you used very well the replacement concept for tires and cars. So you had to use both. And I think you did a very good job. To be frank, I've interviewed dozens and dozens of candidates with this case, and you did a very, very good job. There were a couple of mistakes, thought mistakes that I'm sure you're gonna say, oh damn, how didn't I think about that? But it's always like that, and that's why we're here for, right? So the idea is to learn and to make sure you're not gonna make the same mistakes when you're at your Rio interview, which is coming soon. So the first thing, so the best practice, your good habits are already internalized. So you always start rephrasing the problem, making sure you got it, and asking clarification questions. Now, the clarification questions you asked, I think, could have been better. It's hard to improve clarification questions because it's you have no time to think about them. It's just like something that you don't understand and then you ask. So it's hard to improve that. It's pretty much it's very spontaneous what you ask as clarification questions. So I didn't understand exactly your question. Doesn't matter to whom we sell or to whom they sell. Does it matter? So it's nice when you ask something to tell me why this information matters. So you said, does it matter, or are they worried about to whom they are going to sell it? And then he said, I'm asking that because in my possible strategy or structure to calculate that number or the value of the patent, I'm going to think about synergies. And if I think about the synergies with the buyer, then I need to understand more or less if there's a preference to whom we're going to sell. Right? Yeah. I realized that was important for you after you mentioned the synergies. But before that, it was unclear to me why does it make a difference for the price to whom we sell it, right?
Okay.
So whenever you ask a question, try to make it clear why this information is important for your analysis, even if it's a clarification question. One clarification question that you should always ask when it comes to a case where there's a patent is the duration of the patent. Right? Every patent has a duration. In this case, it was 20 years, which is a pretty common duration for a patent. And this would impact your solution in that during the patent period or time where it's valid, we can make more money because we have the right to sell it alone if we have it. After this patent, of course, we will still make money because we are established in the market, but then other competitors can use the same technology, and then of course our market share would drop a lot. So the patent duration would help you then to separate this this flow of cash, this discounted cash flow, into two parts, right? Actually, you don't need to go down to the calculations and say, okay, period 1 during the patent would make that much money. After the patent, we would make that much. You can just think of an average. That's also okay. But the fact that you mentioned that you took that into consideration, what's the patent duration, it makes a difference, right? Yeah. I know that if you had time, you would then have a model with 2 periods. So the duration of the patent is something you're never going to forget again when you come across a case with a patent, right? So let's go then. First, the biggest improvement opportunities or the biggest mistakes I think you made. So that was the first one, the duration of the patent that you didn't consider. The second one is a bit more subtle. You said that, and that was a very good remark you made, that there are two kinds of customers: new cars or car producers, and private people or people like us who buy tires to replace their used tires, right? So that's exactly, very few people, very few candidates think of that, and sometimes I have to bring them to that thought. I have to give them very explicit hints, but I didn't need that with you at all, so very, very good. However, you didn't think that only the new cars would buy this tire for 5 times the price of the conventional tire. Why? If you have a car that is about to break down and you're only gonna change your tires one last time, right? You have a car that is 80 years old and you're gonna change only one last time your tires. Are you gonna even consider buying a tire that lasts forever or lasts only the lifetime of your car for $400, or would you buy a conventional tire for $100 a piece?
Yeah, this is why my number is so huge, because this is 1.8 billion cars.
Exactly.
Tires.
Exactly. So actually, only the new car market is then is our target here. If you price the new tires like you did, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you can change the pricing, but if you price it the way you did, it assumes then that only the new cars will be our target market. So that was one of the big mistakes.
Yeah.
Very also important, even if you consider that everybody would buy those tires, even the used cars or people like us would buy the tires. It's very tricky, but at the beginning, you would have 1.8 billion cars, but as we sell to new cars, those tires that never wear off, the number of cars that need to replace their tires will also reduce, right?
Yeah.
So it's an exponential here. See that?
Yeah,
It's tricky. It's subtle, but it's a very good point as well. That's also for cases like if you think of new vaccines. Like if you have a new vaccine, then you give it to people, but then they don't need it anymore because they're already vaccinated and they are immune to this disease. So there's a lot of people when you launch it, a lot of target customers, but then because of the nature of the product that is only bought once, you don't need it anymore. So the target market reduces or shrinks alone or by its own, on its own, right? Because of the nature of the product that is used only once. So that's also a very interesting point here that you can extend to other cases where you talk about products that are only used once, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through that. That's pretty much the. Okay, so I think the third biggest mistake is that even though you consider the other applications for this tire, motorbikes, bikes, trucks, buses, anything that uses tires, even airplanes, right? There's a lot of things that use tires, not only cars. You mentioned that, and I told you, I gave you the hint, okay, consider that for later. When you talk about your conclusion, you forgot it. And that's a very big point, a very important point for your drivers that would drive the price up. So this price is only based on what we can do, what money or profit we can make with cars. But there's a lot of other uses for that. So that's the third, I think, main issue in your solution. Don't worry, all the candidates that I've interviewed so far with this case, they always have two main issues, usually 3 or more. So the best ones had only 2. So a lot of them just think of the revenues, they don't think of the costs. A lot of them don't think of discounting the money to the present value. So you did a lot of things right. So don't get too demotivated. So let's go through the chronological feedback here. There was one thing that I realized that you definitely need to improve. You're very good with calculations, but with big numbers, with a lot of zeros, you got a bit confused, or you took a bit too long to calculate very simple things. For instance, 2.2 billion cars, the market share is 10%. It took you, I don't know, 10 seconds to divide it by 10. So it should be faster, it should be more immediate. You didn't make any calculation wrong, which is excellent. But I realized in 3 different points in the case that the zeros complicated a bit your calculations. So don't count the zeros. Okay, if you're talking about billions, don't count 9 times 0. Do like that. So if you have to multiply by 400, which was the case with 220 million, right, tires, multiply by $400, what you should do is multiply it by 4. How much is that? 880. And multiply it by 10, that's 8.8 billion. And multiply it by 10 again, that's 880. So see that you just split, when you have big numbers, split one of the numbers into steps that are easy to calculate. Times 4, times 10, times 10. So don't try to calculate everything together and count the number of zeros. That's not the most efficient way, right? Great. So there's also one tricky aspect that I'm not gonna blame you for not having thought of that, because it's controversial. The fact that there's 4 tires per car, there's actually a spare tire, right? Okay. So a car has to have a spare tire in case of any, I don't know, if the tire is flat out, then they need a 5th tire. So that's not that important. So there's a lot of positive points here that I noted down. The way that you calculated the price was very good. So that's exactly what I expect my candidates to do. So there's 3 ways of pricing something. First one is cost-based pricing, which is not very smart, because especially when you're talking about an innovation, you don't want to just make 10% over the costs, right? So it's not really a good idea for innovations. The second way is to benchmark the competition. In this case, there's none, because it's a new product again. So all that's left is the third option, which is what the customer is willing to pay. And here, there's also an interesting comment, which I think is an improvement suggestion for you. You could have thought a bit longer about which other factors would influence this price. For instance, if you think of an old lady, she's not going to be, very likely she's not going to buy the tires and replace them herself, is she? She's going to pay for someone to replace it. Yeah. So there's also costs referring to the change, or to the they have to go to a workshop and have it changed. There is also the value of time for people to go to the workshop. So the convenience is also something that would bring the price up. And maybe the safety. If you always have a brand new tire, you're gonna be safer for all the time. Whereas if you have a tire that wears off, when it's worn off and you need to change it, then your safety is reduced as well, right? So there might be very rich people thinking, okay, I'll buy it just because it's safer. Yeah. So that's something also that would bring the price up. But I really like your uncertainty factor, that people might want to change their tires, their wheels, and if they buy a tire that lasts forever, they need to keep it, otherwise they'll be throwing money away, right? So that was a very good point as well. Also very interesting to mention that there is the multiple approach to estimate the value of a company. So there I could again see your investment banking background going to the surface, which is really good. Very, very well done. I saw you also doing a sanity check when you got to the value 616 billion. You said, whoa, that's huge. And I really like when candidates, after getting a number, when they challenge their answer. That's what consultants have to do. And whenever you get to an answer, you have to challenge it. You have to double check. You have to do a sanity check. Why? Because you might have made a mistake, and only by double checking it or by sanity checking it, you're going to be able to find this mistake before you show that to the client, right? If you had time, I think you would have put more effort to think of why this number is so big. And maybe you would have realized that actually your market is only those 400 million cars, not those 1.8 plus 400 million, right?
Yeah.
So that was really good. I also like the way you asked for time to collect your thoughts about the risks and drivers. So that's the more qualitative aspect of this case. That's why I find it very interesting. There's the quant, which is almost the whole case, but also at the end, some qualitative aspects. And you have to ask for time to gather your thoughts and to do a very short brainstorming. So very good. Points that I think missed in this risks and drivers for the price to change were, for instance, maybe the product does not work after 10 years. It comes out that, I don't know, there is a failure that in the laboratory they tested it a lot, but in reality it has not stood the test of time. It hasn't been put to the test of time yet. So there might be some problem and it might be a flop, and then the value, there's a risk of it being a flop, right? If you had considered the patent, the period of the patent would also, there would be a risk that Chinese, I don't know, companies copy it even with you having a patent. So that would be a risk. There's also the risk that cars are not used at all in the future. There's a new technology in 10 years that replaces cars. Very unlikely, but there is a chance, there is a risk. Or maybe there is a chance or risk that tires are replaced by a new technology, so you don't need them anymore. Very unlikely as well. But I really liked the points that you mentioned. Also the oil price, the competitors also launching their products was very good. Okay, let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. So yeah, your conclusion. So last but not least, your conclusion was very good because you started with the answer first, and that is exactly what you should do. The value of your patent, dear CEO, the value of your patent is 660 billion. Why? Because we did that and that and that. Maybe you could have explained it a bit, right? It was, I think, too short, your conclusion. Well, what we did was we considered the global market, we thought of the pricing of the same product, and how many people we would acquire or how much market share we would have by using this price. And we discounted the cash flow generated, so revenues minus costs of the production of this tire, and we came up with a discounted cash flow of 660. We then discounted it by 60% or 50% because of the following risks. Number one, or maybe because of the following three risks. Whenever you take time to prepare your conclusion, you have to know the number of aspects you're going to mention. That's the reason why you take time. So when you take time, you know, okay, there's three risks or three main reasons or four justifications, whatever. You have to know the number in advance, and then you mention them one by one, numbering them. Number one, the risk that our technology is copied. Number two, trends that the car market is slowed down by better public transportations in cities. Number three, the behavior of our competitors. So you already said, I have three reasons, number one, number two, number three. Right, so it sounds much better and much more structured.
Agree.
So yeah, that was a great performance. Thanks